Rotation is right around the corner, or depending on when you're watching this video, it might already have happened. And rotation's like pretty funny because like it's the time of year where everyone is putting an insane amount of stock in these Japanese events of just a very underdeveloped formats. Like if we look back at some of these Champions League that happened right before our rotation and then the events that transpired in our formats, things do not look so good. If we look at the Champions League for the 2024 rotation, Arc Vulpix, Bibzard, and Great Tusk Mill were just straight up not good decks in this format, and they all made extremely deep runs getting top 16 or better at this event. And looking at the 2023 rotation, the picture is much cleaner. However, Miraidon Regieleki won this tournament and it never really caught on in the rest of the world, and it's always funny to pick on Lostina because that deck was aggressively mid. I'm not trying to dump on Japan too hard here, but also their prismatic format Champions League did not really resemble all the stuff that transpired here at these most recent prismatic evolutions format tournaments. So where am I trying to go with this? Like, no, I'm not trying to dump on Japanese players. Obviously, some of the best players in the game are Japanese. Like, EYC was just won by Ryuki. What I'm trying to say is silly things happen in these underdeveloped formats. So it is kind of funny that people put a ton of stock into these tournaments that don't have a ton of value overall. I'm not saying they're relevant, but they are a little all over the place. We maybe should put a little more thought into something than just like, oh yeah, this deck got top 16 in this Japanese Champions League, let me just send a bunch of games with it. Or we shouldn't just be like, wow, Gardevoir just totally whiffed top 16 in this event. It is totally unplayable of a deck. With all that being said, I'm going to try to do my best to predict which decks out of this Champions League are going to be actual viable decks in our format and which ones will be decks that are just not good at all. So I'm going to separate these decks into two categories, pretenders and contenders. Contenders are decks that I expect to consistently be making deep runs at major tournaments, intending for those cash finishes. Pretenders are decks that I expect to either be straight up not viable or decks that I don't expect to be consistently going deep into tournaments. I will put a huge disclaimer on this, and I'm sure I'm going to get some stuff wrong, and you could probably bookmark this video and check back in a couple months and laugh at me and say, yo, this Blitzle guy's stupid because this deck did not end up being good, or this deck that he said was bad ended up being good, and go ahead and do that. I'm inviting you to make fun of me. I have not extensively tested this format or all the decks in it or have broken optimized 60s for all of them. I'm just using my experience as someone who's played this game for a few years and I guess is kind of good at it. So without further ado, let's just get into the rankings. I really don't want to talk about walls 17 times, so I'm just going to be talking about each unique archetype, so that leaves us with 11 total deck. And to kick us off, let's talk about Feraligatr. Feraligatr is a really cool deck because it's just like totally not even a thing in our current format just because of how fast different decks are, and some of those things rotate, just the format as a whole gets less consistent, and Feraligatr gets to keep a lot of its cool toys, I guess. It's almost a pure single price deck. Really, the core of it is that Torrential Heart ability that increases its own damage on all of its attacks, as well as damaging itself, which is actually pretty huge because now Monkey Dory can get involved and move some damage counters off that Feraligatr, help buff our damage, spread stuff around. But also what's really cool is that Torrential Heart ability is all attacks, and the pre-evolutions Totodile and Crocodile have some really cool attacks that help give this deck a lot of options. Like Totodile can retreat lock, and this is awesome because we are putting damage on ourselves and can use Monkey Dory to spread counters everywhere while our opponent is stuck active. And Crocodile can actually do a respectable amount of damage with its hit and run attack, so we can make use of some great walls like Milotic or Mimikyu. Lists have used both Trolley and Grand Tree as a spec most frequently. I personally prefer Trolley because we really want a super wide board of all really 5 Pokemon, and it also lets us cheat down on space a little bit, play a few less consistency cards because Trolley is so strong. So I feel like that is the way to go with a spec in this deck. I also could see Unfair Stamp being kind of sneaky as well, kind of how we've seen some of these slower Dragapult decks do well in the current format. Like you just sit there and Badoo for several turns while you build your board, and then as soon as they kill the Badoo, you go Unfair Stamp and just try to take advantage of them having a pretty undeveloped board. And yet what I think is like most unique and cool about this deck is just the sheer amount of options it has, which it kind of doesn't look like on the outside looking in. It can be a really slow, grindy single price deck, hitting and running walls, and then taking your big one-shots in the late game. Or you can be a big 2-price one-shot deck, but the Lux Cape on, have 288 HP. Or you can play somewhere in the middle, do a mix of both things. However, like the big weakness of this deck is it is a little slow and missing an energy attachments or an evolution early in the game can be really punishing and set you pretty far back. And then another weakness is just Iono can be really devastating because there's no form of onboard draw. So if we need to find that last energy or dust to close out a game, it might be a little bit tricky sometimes. So overall, I think Feraligatr will solidify itself as a solid deck in the format thanks to how well it price trades and just how flexible it is. So I'll be putting it in the contenders category. So the next deck I want to talk about is the second place Dragapult Gholdengo deck. On the surface, this seems like a really bizarre and clunky combination, but I think if you dig a little deeper, it actually makes a lot of sense. Gholdengo covers Pult's weaknesses of not being able to one-shot things, while Pult is able to clean up a lot of smaller HP Pokemon that normally price trade pretty well with Gholdengo. And with Walls being one of the bigger and scarier decks in this new format, it is really cool how Gholdengo manages to one-shot Milotic, while Dragapult can deal with Cornerstone and Dracloak can deal with Mimikyu, so you kind of naturally have a pretty good Walls matchup. And also, they just don't really get in each other's way at all. Gholdengo has no problem playing all sorts of different energy types because of Energy Search Pro, and also even in the matches where one attacker isn't particularly useful, like at the very least they're just drawing you cards and helping you play the game. So what holds us back, in my opinion, is we're just trying to make two Evos work, and that's just going to present its own reliability and consistency problems. And also sketches me out pretty hard that the deck has never seen any success outside of Japan, and it isn't the first time it's popped up in Japan. In fact, in that previously mentioned Prismatic Evolution format's Champions League, there was a pretty high placing Gholdengo list, and that deck never did anything in our Prismatic Evolution formats. So this deck just screams jank Japanese deck to me. So I can't really go against my morals and put this deck as a true contender. I think it is one of the better decks in the pretenders category. I just can't see this deck putting up big finishes consistently in a more developed format. So the next deck standing wise is Blissey. But like, that deck kind of makes sense to touch on Walls first before doing Blissey, but then like, I really want to procrastinate talking about Walls as long as I possibly can, so yeah, I'm gonna go take a quick break, touch some grass, you know, do stuff I normally do, of course. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you here for a few minutes, and when I get back in probably an hour or so, we can talk about Walls.
Wait, did Blitzle seriously just leave because he didn't want to talk about Walls? Huh? Oh, who am I? Oh yeah, I'm the door y'all love to stare at when Blitzle streams. But he doesn't really stream anymore. Full-time content creator, am I right? Since he's gone, let's do something that I know he's gonna hate. I hear him keep talking about endgame sleeves and how good they are. Something about how durable and how they're the best feeling sleeves in the game. Not that I would know, I'm a door, I can't shuffle cards. I also hear him glaze TC Evolution's counters and dice a lot, about how premium and good they are to use, so maybe we should check out those too. I don't like being in this room in the dark, so please help keep the lights on. Also watched him put the discount codes in the description before, so if you can check out those and even save you a little money. Wait, if Blitzle keeps making content and making more money, will you replace me with a fancier door? Uh-oh, he's coming back. Maybe don't use the codes? Because then he might suspect something funny happened while he was lying about touching grass. He probably was, I don't know, scrolling Twitter or doing something stupid like that. Yeah, you guys didn't hear anything.
Okay, I'm back. Hopefully nothing weird happened while I was gone. And yeah, now let's talk about some Walls. Walls feels like the hardest deck to rank because its strategy is really simple but really effective if the meta is not prepared for it. Like in the Champions League, most of the decks that did extremely well did not have answer to Walls. Like the Terror Box list that did well were not playing Cornerstone Ogerpon, so all the Walls player had to do was put down Frigoraph and heal it a bunch of times and the game was over. Similar against Raging Bolt or Charizard or any of those decks that just folded to one of Walls' different walling options. Things start to get a lot more complicated for Walls if people start teching for it. Something like a Cornerstone Ogerpon totally ruins a lot of their strategies in many matchups, like they can't even hit it with Milotic or Frigoraph. For that reason, as well as some of the decks that have really naturally good Walls matchups, such as Gardevoir and Archaludon gaining a little bit of hype in the post-Champions League period, things don't look super positive for Walls at the moment. What really has me torn important though is I know Walls is going to have 1 or 2 deep runs in this format, and I really don't want someone to like comment on this video after Walls wins a regional and it's like,
Alloutblitzle, you're stupid, Walls, but if you're dumb.
I'm gonna get out in front of it and say, yes, I think Walls will end up spiking a couple of tournaments in this format, but the criteria for a contender was consistently doing well. I really can't see Walls being good for several consecutive tournaments in a row. When it becomes a popular deck, people tech for it. When it becomes less good and successful, then people stop taking for it and it does good again. It'll kind of be that constant cycle. So this might end up being kind of a hot take, but I'm gonna put Walls in the pretenders here. I don't think it'll consistently be going deep into tournaments in this format. This sort of segues us into the Blissey deck that got third. Blissey is an extremely bulky Pokemon that has a relatively modest 180 damage attack. With its cool ability, we can move energies around and utilize Monkey Dory to improve that relatively weak 180 into one-shots and some basic Pokemon EX. However, Blissey can really struggle into decks that can one-shot it, so that's where the walling options come in, where we could use like Cornerstone Ogerpon against like Goldengo, or for Rigoroth versus Raging Bolt. Just like we talked about in the previous part about Walls, I don't think these are super dependable as our primary option in some of these bigger matchups. If those one-shot decks like Bolt and Goldengo were not that popular and Blissey did very good in all those two-shot decks, I could see this deck being very good. I just don't really see that happening. So for the same reason, we have to dock Walls and put them into the pretenders category. I feel like we have to do the same thing to Blissey. I feel like I've been a bit of a Debbie Downer and kind of harsh on a lot of decks, so I'm gonna brighten the mood and just drop Terrorbox right into the contenders category. I feel like this deck could really be the deck to beat next format because it can really do everything. Has oppressive early game plays, has one-hit options on stuff like Raging Bolt and Dragapult, has a one-shot attacker that can't get one-shot back, and has one of the best and most efficient late game finishers as potential options, and kind of all this bound together by Crystal, Crispin, and Teal Mask for energy acceleration, as well as Noctowl to kind of just tie everything together. So this may seem like an incredibly broken and perfect deck, and how does this deck lose? Well, it is a bit fragile towards the late game because you're really relying on Pheasantipity and Mew EX to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So if the opponent can do like Counter Catcher and bring one of those up, plus combine them with an Iono, it can be a bit scary. So this deck is just a little bit of a glass cannon, but sometimes it really doesn't even matter because you just blow them off the board before they get to play the game because this Wellspring is so strong in a format without any reliable bench barrier. And oh yeah, Tord played this deck at the Champions League, so that gives it even more credibility. So I really expect Terrorbox to be one of the top decks in the Journey Together formats. Next deck is the final top 8 finisher, Charizard EX. And Charizard is interesting because it's been a mainstay in a lot of older standard formats pre-rotation, but in the Prismatic format it had a pretty steep fall off with Bidoof coming out and the rise of Dragapult. So it seems quite weird that Charizard is popping up and doing good again, especially considering it added no new cards and Walls was doing really good, and this list features very limited ways to get through it. But of course, Charizard combined with Dusknoir is still a really powerful combination of cards. One thing that I found a little bit funny about this new Charizard deck was without reading Charizard, this deck actually isn't nearly as good into the beatstick decks as Charizard has been in the past, where like Sar's been famous for kind of beating up Raging Bolt and Miraidon, and now without Razzard to kind of skew the price rate at the end of the game, it's not all that simple anymore. And since Charizard has just been a successful deck in the past, it is just a very high power level deck, I can still see it succeeding even though it has been kind of inconsistent as of late. Of course, Bolt remains still troublesome, so it's really difficult to tell what its ceiling really is this format. I'm going to trust the ceiling on Charizard and put it in the contenders category. Good card. I think it will end up getting quite a few top finishes. Up next, we have Dragapult Dusknoir, the deck that many people consider to be the best deck in the Prismatic Evolutions format. And while a lot of the key players stick around, Dragapult, Dusknoir, and Bidoof, there are a few notable losses that do raise a few question marks around Dragapult's viability. Radiant Alakazam is pretty annoying to lose because of its damage fixing potential. We can't replace it with Hawlucha, so it's not a massive loss. The main part is consistency has been significantly hindered. No Rotom V makes those turn 1s going first a lot weaker, and of course Lumineon for Arven and Poffin is now no longer a thing. But it's not just that turn 1 consistency. Lumineon making Crispin harder to find makes chaining Pulse a little bit trickier to do. But I think the biggest loss, which at least for me kind of flew under the radar, was Lance. Lance. Lance is just amazing. Pretty much all phases of the early game, like turn 1 gets your Dreepies, turn 2 gets your cloaks, turn 3 gets more cloaks and Polts. And there's really not a good one-to-one replacement. Like the list from the Champions League played Jock, which is great, but not good at all on the first turn of the game. Does not help us find Dreepies at all. So some newer lists have played the new Brock Scouting card as a way to get Dreepies on the first turn. Only getting 1 cloak after that is pretty underwhelming, but it might be the best that we have right now. There's still the debate of Crystal versus Stamp. I'm still a believer in the Crystal because it is even harder to chain Polt attacks now without Luminion for Crispin, but Stamp is still an incredibly powerful card. Like Badoo into Stamp into Polt attack. It's a disgusting combination. I'm sure both will be successful in this new format. I'm sure other Polt builds will succeed in this format as well. Stuff like Polt Monkey or Polt Thorns that like have their own merits in this format as well. I'm not going to doubt the power of Phantom Dive combined with Curse Blast, so despite all the question marks regarding consistency and pretty much every deck playing Lily's Clefairy, I'm going to put Polt in the contenders category. It's just too good to not see some sort of success this format. Next up, we have Raging Bolt, and I'm immediately going to drop it into the contenders category. Raging Bolt has to undergo a pretty significant engine overhaul because of rotation, but it still managed to have a pretty reliable engine thanks to Noctowl. While not being nearly as explosive since Pokestop and Radiant Greninja are gone, its consistency in a format full of jank and inconsistent decks I think pushes it pretty far in this format. Some of my favorite inclusions in this list from the Champions League are the Ditto to basically turn a Fan Rotom into any of your basic EX Pokemon, and I'm also a huge fan of Jamming Tower in this poster formats. You may have noticed all the powerful tool cards that we keep mentioning in many of these other high-performing deck lists, and being able to just Noctowl and search that out and be able to shut down your opponent's tools is very, very powerful. And also, it can be really nice to bounce your own Area 0 and clear some different liabilities in certain situations. It's tough to get super excited about Bolt because it is still just a super linear beat stick deck, but I believe it will still be a consistent performer in our post-rotation formats. Next up, we have Zoroark, and I really want to be positive about this archetype since I'm very nostalgic for the old Zoroark GX from back in the day, but I'm kind of struggling to see this deck's strengths. Zoroark is only as good as the end Pokemon around it, and the end Pokemon that I've been seeing play in these Zoroark decks are Darmanitan and Reshiram. Darmanitan is basically a higher maintenance single prize Wellspring Mask Ogerpon, and Reshiram gives an outrage style attack as well as a vanilla 270 punch option. This means our damage is frequently topping out at 210 if we can combine it with like Binding Mochi or 200 with the Defiance Bands. I just don't think this gets the job done against enough decks. And also like the bench space can be kind of annoying sometimes because we want lots of Zoroarks on our board. We also have to have these other Pokemon to actually attack with, even sometimes a backup of that Pokemon, because if we only have one Darumaka down, it's going to get chased a lot of the time. So I'm just extremely skeptical. If this deck is going to be good, and this is a big if, it is because it is significantly more consistent than everything else, and that kind of compensates for the fact that it's pretty mid offensive stats. I really can't see that happening. I might get burned for this, but I'm going to put it down as a pretender. I just don't have enough faith in the ends cards in the format currently, so maybe we'll get some more in the future that will make Zoroark a real threat eventually. And I'm actually going to preface this that maybe Zoroark will see play as a draw engine in some decks, but that doesn't count. This says end Zoroark as its own archetype, which I just cannot see being a consistent performer in our formats. Moving on to a different stage 1 toolbox style deck, we have Flareon Box. And looking at Flareon individually, it doesn't really do it justice. 130 energy acceleration is a solid attack, but it's not really all that good until you realize that the Eevee lets you evolve on the first turn, so we can be dishing out 130 plus energy excel as early as turn 1, getting our attackers loaded up, which is actually pretty good. And then that second attack has a seemingly pretty awkward 3 energies. That's really no problem thanks to stuff like Crispin and Crystal if you choose to play it, and then we have since we're a Terra deck, we get to play Noctowl, and we can easily find all of our goodies. We don't have to play like super heavy counts of them because of it. The list from the Champions League also includes Leafeon EX, which can be amazing to deny spreading lines from the opponent. And while this list doesn't include it, building around Sylveon EX and its devastating Angelite attack could also be really, really cool. I haven't really seen too much hype around this deck, and I'm really not sure why exactly. It does seem pretty honest, and I guess that auto loss to walls may have held down its potential in this Champions Champions League. I don't have a ton of faith in walls specifically as an archetype. I think with enough innovation, this deck could end up being a solid tier 2 contender in our format. So this might actually be kind of controversial. I don't know. I just haven't seen a ton of fanfare on this deck, but I'm going to put it in the contenders category. Oh, and I guess Gold Dengo is in contenders. So why is Dengo ranked higher than Pole Dengo when Pole Dengo did better at the Champions League? And that is because I like that Classic Dengo list has a lot less going on, but still covers a lot of the same ground. We have the Dunsparce to not only provide additional draw power where Dracloak would, but it also functions as our cornerstone answer because of the Dunsparce EX. And of course, without Pult, we are significantly worse against single prize decks or decks with single prize options, but those didn't actually do that good in the Champions League. So moving forward, if decks that have a bunch of single prizes, maybe something like a Gardevoir gain a bit more steam, I could see switching over to the Pult build, or even maybe including something like Jamming Tower in this list, so you don't have to play all that additional stuff. So yes, I think Pure Dengo will be consistent threats in this format, but like I said earlier, Dengo Pult was one of the stronger decks in contenders, and I could see it being better in certain metas if there's a lot more single prize threats in them. So yeah, that is my tier list of the decks I think will and will not be successful in the post-rotation Journey Together meta. But instead of wrapping up this video, I'm gonna procrastinate, and I don't want to work, so I'm just gonna go scroll Twitter for like the 17th time today. So I'll be right back and wrap up the video in a few minutes.
Wow, AOB seriously just left again? This guy's so lazy, man. I don't know how he has as many subscribers as he does. To be honest, I might just be carrying the channel. Well, I guess I'm gonna wrap up this video because Blitzle is just super lazy. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'm sure his take sucked, but I'm happy that you guys suffered through it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and check out this video on screen right now. It'll make me very happy. You're probably wondering why you're taking advice from a door on what to watch next, but trust the process.